Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Wednesday, July 26th, 2017 edition of VR News. Let's dive right into VR News, starting with this first story. Probably not the first, definitely not the last, is this example of Crytek including technology in an update that they first pioneered in VR, in this case in Robinson the Journey. The tech has to do with vegetation like plants and trees and how that vegetation bends due to either touch or environmental factors, wind, rain, sleet, etc. Crytek's statement: the history behind this feature comes out of our Robinson the Journey development and how we needed a more accurate and physically dependent bending solution for our vegetation. This update available in the Cryengine 5.4 update. Next up, 4 currently only playable in Asia PlayStation VR titles making their way over to the rest of the world. First up, we've got Stifled. We've talked about this game before. You play a character by the name of David Ridley, battling dark forces around him in a literal sense. The entire game world is dark around you. To illuminate it, you've got to make noises into the PlayStation VR's built-in microphone. The problem is, the more you illuminate, the more noise you make, the bigger the chance that whatever baddies are out there find you. Next, we've got The Walker. This is a fantasy combat tale from a Chinese developer. In it, you are the distant descendant of an ancient family that dabs in martial arts and sorcery, and it's up to you to save the world from a demonic militia. Yes, cliched as all hell, but what I like about it is that it takes place in historic Shanghai, not the modern metropolis. I think that's going to lend a lot of flavor to the game. Third title, Kill X, also from a Chinese developer. This one kind of more your standard wave-based template, you against a metric crap ton of undead mutants. And the last title, Legion Commander, you guessed it, also Chinese developed. This one a real-time strategy game that I personally think borrows, and I'm surprised nobody mentioned this, heavily from World of Warcraft. I'm not saying they've taken the exact graphics, but they sure as hell were inspired, and that's being polite, by that title. Even the plot line, which involves orcs, humans, and elves. Basically, I'm just going to call a spade and say, yeah, it borrows a lot from World of Warcraft. Next up, CCP, perhaps best known for games in the EVE universe, Online, Valkyrie. They announced via a Sony blog posting that they're going to be releasing their VR sports title, Sparc, to PlayStation VR August 29th. And until then, they plan on increasing their marketing efforts, specifically with regards to a set of single-player challenges that they recently added. Having billed themselves as a mostly multiplayer experience, they want to make sure that they do get across it has single-player capability. Then we have the Oculus 1.17 update. This one's interesting. It's interesting for those of us who have Rift games in 2 places, i.e. Oculus Home and via Steam VR. And I'm sure that's probably going to be the majority of people that own a Rift. They're going to have their games in both places. And that's because of stuff like Steam sales, Oculus Home sales, etc. Well, the 1.17 update is going to allow you to virtually link to those Steam VR Rift games only in Oculus Home. Now, it is just a link, so if you think you're removing it and somehow uninstalling the game, you're not. You are just severing a virtual link. Still undecided. Does this make it better, or does it kind of muddy the waters? What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. And this story, very cool. There are still definitely tactile challenges to online VR shopping. The ability to touch certain products, very, very important. Hell, even sniff them. At least there are companies making forays into the visual side of online VR shopping. Hopefully, eventually, tactile is possible. In the meantime, we've got companies like the Vera Bradley brand. They've partnered with tech startup Obsessed to launch a VR shopping experience. It's going to be out later this week for their betting products. There's also going to be a web VR version of the same app available. Private servers, they've existed for World of Warcraft for a very long time. And they allow you to do stuff like play with other people, multiplayer. Let's do that whole story again. Private servers for World of Warcraft, they've been around for a long time, as have map wandering programs where you can explore maps offline. What we haven't seen, at least I wasn't aware of, was a way of exploring World of Warcraft maps in virtual reality. Well, thanks to YouTube user Puffy Cheeks and a friend of his, and I've put both of the YouTube channels in the description below, they've done exactly that, taking specific World of Warcraft areas and maps and making them viewable through VR. So you could wander around Stormwind, for example. They've got future areas like Molten Core that they want to work on. Right now, it looks like it's available for the Vive. Haven't been able to determine if it's Rift compatible as well. But for those of you really into World of Warcraft, that may be cool. And then application THEWAVEVR. These guys have an application, but they offer a service. And the service is online concerts in 360 degrees. They've done 2 such concerts before. Their third, which is going to be free, involves HEAVYGRINDER as the main act. So it's going to be a bit of a kind of a rave-like atmosphere. That's at 7 p.m. Pacific, so 10 Eastern, or for me, 11 out here. Both Vive and Rift supported via their Steam VR THEWAVEVR app. And this story, which comes to us during this week's Google announcement, and that was an earnings call where Google CEO Sundar Pichai mentioned that by the end of 2017, they hope to have 11 Daydream-ready phones. He also indicated that their hope is still to operate Daydream on what he calls Android scale, which of course is to say compatible with all Android phones. And our last story, for a lot of Canadians, World War I had some battles that were pivotal in kind of forging our global identity. Vimy Ridge, one of them. Passchendaele, absolutely another. Well, it is the 100th anniversary of the horrific battle known as Passchendaele. In memory of that event comes a virtual reality application. It was a battle that saw 500,000 casualties from both sides. One of the last big battles for the Allies. Field Marshal Haig's task was to basically penetrate this Western Front. Over 1 million men on each side fought in this battle. Well, the ground of this battlefield started out dry, and initially the Allies made some gains, but they weren't able to hold those gains. The worst rain in decades began pelting down in August. What was dry was now horrible mud. And then to top it off, the barrage of literally 1 million+ artillery shells from the Germans turned the ground literally into hell on earth. And by the time the Canadians came, they were actually invited to this, not ordered to this because of their victories at Vimy Ridge and Hill 70, but for how they did in battle in general. They were so renowned, even their enemies, the Germans, anointed them with the title Stormtroopers. German generals at the time saying, we can stop the British, the Australians, even the French, but when the Canadians come on, they do so as a storm that simply cannot be stopped. The Canadian General Currie estimated that taking the ridge would cost 16,000 Canadian lives. He was determined to not lose even a single person more, and rather than using the Allied mass charge strategy that had been carried out for much of the war, his strategy was based on small incremental waves called bite and hold. And that was to see a different outcome. Ended up costing 15,500 Canadian lives, just 500 short of General Currie's estimate. Well, Dan Snow, who is a British television historian working with a development firm, he's created 10 absolutely amazing historical 360-degree videos dealing with Passchendaele. I've linked those in the description below. For me, history, especially when it comes to war, it's not about glorifying the war. It's about ensuring we don't forget, that we don't repeat what brought us into those wars in the first place. I think the more visceral, the more you can drive home the reality of what it was like during those wars, the more effective those lessons are going to be. And in that respect, VR can only help. Well, guys, that is it for the Wednesday edition of VR News. As always, cheers.